This object has been scientifically documented to have a powerful impact on your mind. More on that later, but we really don't need experiments to tell us that clothing affects how we feel. It affects how we feel about events, it affects how we feel about other people, and it can affect how we feel about ourselves. It can be an expression of culture or of status or of intention. Clothing and the mind are linked. And as Swedenborg wrote, our mind is our spirit, with the body being a covering through which the mind or spirit senses and acts in its world. So what is the nature of this spirit-clothing connection? How deep does it go? What does it mean, and what can we learn from it? Well, we've got our questions. We're going to go searching tonight for answers. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborgian Life. Thanks very much for coming out. My name is Curtis Childs, and I am going to be the host tonight. We'll get through it, don't worry. And if you guys want to be part of the conversation, you can. We take live questions and comments at the end. If anything, as we go through the show, strikes you, you say, that's funny or that's interesting, I want to hear more about that, write it in, and we'll get to it. All right, so we're going to talk about clothes today. The clothes in heaven, or the spiritual significance of clothing. And you might say, man, that's a pretty obscure topic. Why are we spending all this time on it? There's a couple of reasons. One is that it's interesting. The things that Swedenborg reported in his experiences about the meaning behind clothing is fascinating. Also, clothing is a big deal. People wear it a lot. But finally, as with everything, it's like a tapestry. You take one thread and you find this is attached to everything else. So while we're focusing, we have this framing that is talking about clothing. We're going to get into all kinds of stuff about the nature of spirit, the nature of life, the nature of us. So if that didn't convince you to stay, maybe this graphic will. We're going to start here with part one. All right, welcome back. In this section, we're going to be talking about clothing and the correspondence. So I'm going to explain a little bit about... tricked you. Okay, I didn't really change clothes that fast, but did me appearing in that, as some would say, monkey suit, have any impact? I mean, did it feel any different? Like, I'm a different kind of person. You have a different approach to the information I'm giving out. That's what we're looking for. What is the psychological impact of clothing? Because as Swedenborg said, the mind is the spirit. So if we're talking about psychological impact, we're talking about spiritual impact. We're going to start in the things that seem familiar, and we're going to move from there into the things that are weird and cool. All right, so we're going to start with a study that was in the New York Times, and you know that doctor coat that we had in the beginning. This is what we were referring to. So this is just a little excerpt from the article about the study. 58 undergraduates were randomly assigned to wear a white lab coat or street clothes. They then were given a test for selective attention. Those who wore the white lab coats made about half as many errors. In the second experiment, 74 students were randomly assigned to one of three options: wearing a doctor's coat, wearing a painter's coat, or seeing a doctor's coat. They then were given a test for sustained attention. They had to look at two very similar pictures side by side on a screen and spot four minor differences, writing them down as quickly as possible. Those who wore the doctor's coat, which was identical to the painter's coat, found more differences. They had acquired heightened attention. Those who wore the painter's coat or were primed with merely seeing the doctor's coat found fewer differences between the images. So people wearing something like wearing something like this, that improved their cognitive abilities. But only if they were told it was a doctor's coat. The same thing when they were told it was a painter's coat didn't help them out. So there's both the object and the meaning that we place on the object. It has an impact on the mind. We want to get in now to what Swedenborg said about how the mind is impacted on even an order of magnitude greater in the spiritual world, as he described it. And whatever's happening in the spiritual world is trickling into the consciousness here. So we're going to try to take a look at the root of the phenomena and the effects of the phenomena as we get deeper into this correspondence of clothing. And that word, if you're not familiar, correspondence, this is symbolism, representation. What do clothes symbolize, and how does that affect even the mindset of people who are wearing them here and in the spiritual world? All right, you ready? Part two, let's take a look at some spiritual fashion consultants. We're kind of on a roll with this articles thing. So let's start with another one. This is an article about hoarders or people who have an interesting, it's sort of a show that is about straddling the line between hoarding and just collecting. But there's all these really specific, you could call them obsessions or extreme hobbies that people have. So a Staten Island, New York 33-year-old collects custom-made dolls that cost as much as $1,000 each. Mansfield dolls fill her 3-bedroom apartment on shelves and in their little seats and cradles. I know this sounds morbid, but I would definitely like to be buried with them. So then there's someone else. Darlene has 15,000 shoe-related memorabilia. Kyle, who is only 16, has been obsessed with vacuum cleaners since he was only a toddler. Harold and Patrick's 2,500 square foot home is an homage to Dolly Parton, floor to ceiling. One holds down a job, the other spends his days keeping up with the collection. So here you have people who gravitate very strongly towards very specific things. And why? I mean, there's not really consensus on why people can get so, like a vacuum cleaner that you gotta like people collect baseball cards. I've got to have all the models. I love that. Something about vacuum cleaners draws you to them. So what is it? We can't know for sure, but we may have some insight from a recorded spiritual experience of Emanuel Swedenborg. This is from his Journal of Spiritual Experiences, 1563 and 64. And he says, there are spirits who constitute craving. A kind of craving causes us to desire numerous things, such as baths, the clothes we like to wear, and so on. One spirit longed so much for me to put on a certain suit that unless I did so, according to him, he could hardly live. And when I was dressed in it, he got such enjoyment from it that nothing could have been more enjoyable. He begged to be left in that joyful state. So this is Swedenborg. He had this condition where he claimed his spiritual eyes were open. So he was able to interact with the spiritual world on a regular basis and see that it was omnipresent. It was immediate. It was affecting everyone, affecting how we think and feel about the world, this connection to spirits in the spiritual world. And he was saying there was a spirit hanging out with him who really wanted Swedenborg to wear a particular outfit. So is part of our penchant for certain kinds of clothing driven by our spiritual associations. He goes on, Spiritual Experiences 1565, describing a little more of why that spirit wanted that shirt. But as for sense such as touch, he, the spirit, said that he did not have that. So spirits have craving, man has sense. I asked him whether he felt along with me when I touched the suit he had so longed for, and he replied that he did not have this sense, but he did have the knowledge of the fact that I was feeling it. Therefore there are spirits who may be called cravings, and some almost burn with themselves to the point where they can hardly control themselves. These spirits exist in a great many kinds and species, for the objects craved for are innumerable, like in our article. They are bodily spirits or pertain to the body, while desires pertain to the mind. The spirits called cravings cause us to crave, or arouse our appetites, and from this they derive their enjoyments. But the sense is our own. These spirits had brought along from their life in the body the character of ardently longing for specific bodily enjoyments. So, the life you have in the world remains with you, even when you're a spirit. If you get so hooked on something here, you can carry that over to the spiritual world, and the people that you're close to will start to long for the things that you long for, right? So that's just an interesting way to think about cause. And how else would you explain something so specific in people? All right, there's one potential answer. All right, so moving on a little bit here. We have to, even if we get some kind of internal dictate, like I feel like I got to wear this, we think about it. We choose clothes for particular occasions. We try to have a wardrobe and manage it, but it doesn't necessarily work like that on the other side. Again, to Swedenborg's Spiritual Experiences 4716, a person reflects on the different things that he is going to wear and is wearing and does this in various ways. Okay, I'm with you so far. Spirits do not do this. They are giving clothing fitting their personal state and do not know where or when they got them, nor do they care. So here you have spirits, their clothes arising spontaneously as sort of a representation of what's going on for them mentally. So it's a whole different paradigm. And this actually matches the difference the differences between the spiritual world and the physical world, as described by Swedenborg. We're going to go to a handy diagram to kind of sort this out. So here we are, we're a person. We sort of have two outer selves or outer layers to us. One is the physical, meaning our actual literal bodies and the clothing on them. The other is sort of our mental outer self, meaning this is if we're going to think about different things that we can say, and then we say them, the outer self, the part that says it, because we all know that you can be internally plotting and scheming something, but saying and acting different ways. So you're kind of in your outer self there, right? So you have this ability to manipulate your image. And so what Swedenborg is saying is that in the other world, we don't have this ability to externally manipulate things. Here, we can dress up to try to send out a particular message, even if that's not who we really are. We can even talk and act in a way that's not really genuine with our intentions. But in the spiritual world, as he describes it, he calls it an honest world, that everybody can tell what you're really like, and that things are there to be seen, that it's not, you can't have this sort of like PR group managing your image. You are what you are, and people know it. So that would make sense as to why there's this more organic, spontaneous appearance of clothes in the spiritual world, because you can't manipulate the outer self. But it's not quite as simple as clothes always appear without you knowing. We're actually going to get to that in another section. We're going to finish this one, though, with Apocalypse Explained 1226. This is a work that Swedenborg never published, but he had written all the way out. He just decided to rewrite it in a smaller form, which he did publish, which is now being titled Revelation Unveiled. Still, though, I find a lot of cool stuff in Apocalypse Explained. So let's take a look. Those things in which God is. Oh yeah, we're going to hear the word uses a lot. That means useful actions or things we do to benefit society. Okay? Here we go. Those things in which God is are uses. The truth of this proposition is evident from the creation of the universe, from the life of man, and from the essence of uses. This cannot be better seen anywhere than in types in the heavens, creation being there continual and instantaneous. For in the spiritual world, lands exist in a moment, and upon them paradisical gardens, in which there are trees laden with fruits, shrubs, flowers, and plants of every kind. When these are contemplated by a wise man, they are found to be correspondences of the uses in which the angels are, to whom they are given as a reward. For the angels are presented with houses rich in furniture and ornaments, and also with clothing and food palatable and pleasant, all according to uses. So angels clothed according to what they do for the rest of the community. They moreover hold delightful conversations with each other, and these also are uses, because serving as a means of recreation. So it's not just your job, it's you got to relax. That recreates the mind, which is useful in its own way. All these things are bestowed upon them without money or price, but still on account of the uses which they perform. In a word, the whole heaven is full of uses, so that it ought to be called the very kingdom of uses. But on the other hand, those who perform no use are banished to the hells, where they are compelled by a judge to do various kinds of work. If there they refuse, no food is given them, or clothing, or any other bed than the ground. So, oh man, hell, that's a bummer at the end. But if you notice, what he's saying is, if you go to hell, you have to work. And if you don't work, then you don't get food and clothes, which is exactly like it is here on this planet. So, and not that bad, but it's like, you got to be doing something. Swedenborg says that all spiritual life and spiritual joy comes out of somehow serving something greater than yourself. So even if you feel like you don't want to participate, you're going to get pushed in that direction, because that is the secret to life. And sometimes you don't know that you need to be going that way. So everybody's contributing. With just the more evil you are, the less you enjoy it, because you haven't built your life around service or the joy of contributing to something greater. However, you still get to do other things that fit with you, but you got to work as well. So those are a couple things about clothes. And you see there that angels, the clothing springs out of the function to the society. We sort of have that here. Different jobs have different uniforms, but it's to the nth degree in the other life. All right? So now let's take a look at why specific outfits and specific pieces of clothing appear in the spiritual world, what they mean, and then muse on what that might mean for the clothes that we wear here. All right, so for this episode segment, we're going to get out our spiritual wardrobe, which is like this. Doesn't that look good? I participated a little in the creation of that one, which is why it's so good. All right, so what we're going to do is, like we have a bunch of hangers with a bunch of articles of clothing, we're going to go through these little facts about the spiritual world that Swedenborg reported one by one, and a comprehensive picture can emerge about why people have the clothing they have and what impact that clothing has. So let's begin in Secrets of Heaven 2576. This is where he's describing angels and why they have the clothes they have. When angels are presented to view, their inner depths shine out from their face. The more their more external traits are represented both in their body and in their dress, so much so that everyone there can tell another's character simply from her or his clothing. So rather than being a tool to try to project an image, your clothing is an automatic representation of who you are. So the deeper parts of you are reflected in the face, facial expressions, what you look like, and the more superficial things, still good things, are represented in the clothing. So you get a full picture of the person by what they look like and how they're dressed. All right, continuing on. Secrets of Heaven 10,536. Yep, it goes up that high. It's a lot of reading. We're going to be able to do this show for quite some time. The reason why divine truths are meant by clothing generally lies in things in the next life that are representative. So he's saying why clothes can be a representative of divine truth. All there, both angels and spirits appear clothed in garments, each one in garments that accord with his truths. Those in possession of truths that are authentic and come from God appear clothed in brilliantly white garments. Others appear in others different from these. Spirits indeed do not know where their garments come from. They are clothed without their knowing how. And also the garments they wear are varied, as determined by the changes of state they undergo in respect of truths. So you get kind of an upgrade to wardrobe based on the changes your state of mind goes through. All right, so let's continue on to the next item in our wardrobe. So this is continuing in that same number there. In short, the character of their understanding is what is revealed and represented by their garments. For everyone's understanding is shaped by truths and comes to have the same nature as the truths which compose it. The understanding which angels in heaven possess resides on an inner level with them, as a consequence of which their garments are brilliant and white. This brilliance is due to divine good, and the whiteness to the light of heaven, which is divine truth. But the garments of those whose interest lies in external things and not what is internal are drab and torn, like those of beggars in the streets or robbers in the forest. So you get fancy clothes if you want to pay attention to what's really important in life. And I want to put a caveat in there that you don't always see things. I say it's an honest world. You always see things how they are. It's not necessarily always like that. The people who are rejecting love and rejecting truth, moving away from the heaven state of mind toward the hell, don't always see things how they really are. So if you have torn up, raggedy clothes because you have these bad ideas that you're acting on, you might not, it's not like you always see it like that. Swedenborg says that God usually hides that kind of stuff from those people so that they don't have to go around feeling bad about themselves all the time, that God is only going to let any kind of shame or anything like that come in if it's some kind of positive tool to affect change. So most of the time you think, oh, I'm looking pretty great, just like we can here, like, hey, I'm pretty awesome, even though we don't realize some of the negative impacts that we're having. But angels, those in the light of heaven, can see things the way that they really are. All right, so next hanger, let's take a look at Heaven and Hell 181. We can tell that angels' clothes do not merely look like clothes, but really are, because they not only see them, they feel them as well. Further, they have many garments that they take off and put on, and they put away the ones they are not using and put on the ones they are. So here you have something that Swedenborg does. He says in other places, spirits are clothed without knowing how. They don't know clothes just appear on them. But here he's saying, angels sometimes take off and put on their clothes and put them away. So he'll make generalizations that don't necessarily negate specific or differences in the specifics every once in a while. And this is a pattern you'll see throughout Swedenborg. So if he makes some kind of blanket statement like everybody does this, and you're like, oh no, not everybody does. Don't take him that literally on it. He's just saying generally people do this. And you'll see what I'm talking about right here. I've asked them where they got their clothes, and they've told me that their clothes come from the Lord and are given to them, and that sometimes they are clothed without noticing it. So not always. They have also said that their clothes change depending on the changes of their state, that their clothes are radiant and gleaming white in their first and second state, while in the third and fourth states they are somewhat dimmer. This too is because of correspondences, because these changes of state have to do with their intelligence and wisdom. So person to person, it's not just there are some people who are always well dressed and other people who are not. We go even in the next life, we go through cycles. Just like the seasons, just like the daily solar and lunar cycles, we go through phases there of being in greater intelligence and wisdom and less. And it's through these cycles, like the cycles of the seasons, that's how growth happens. That even there, it doesn't get as bad as it is here, but even there we go through these cycles, and that the clothing reflects that. And it's an indicator of sort of where we are in that journey. All right, so couple more items in the wardrobe. Spiritual Experiences 4786. It is worthy of a note that angelic societies around a spirit. Okay, so we're starting to get weird here. Let's buckle up if you're not already buckled up and sitting down. We're going to talk about some specifics of clothing items. It is worthy of note that angelic societies around a spirit flow not only into the things that belong to a spirit's mind and body, but also into the things on the outside of a spirit's body. For example, there are societies of spirits that produce hats, wigs, capes, shirts, likewise garments anywhere you like. This is why it can be known by the clothes the spirit is wearing what societies he is attached to. A certain female spirit had a box in which there were some garments of a small child, and other things that had a childlike innocence. She hid this box, but when it was taken away, the childlike innocence perished. From this it was evident that childlike societies produced it. And it goes on here to the second segment of that number. It is similar with those who have a sword or even a staff with a cross, guard of wood or silver or gold. This too comes into existence by an inflow from societies who possess the defensive power of truth. Those who fashion a sword are those who are defending with truth. If a hat or cap or wig is taken away from someone, communication with such things as flow in from above perishes. Consequently, articles of clothing are from this source. Where there is a connection with anything, it is pictured by a cord that a person holds in his hand. The communication of thoughts and inflow is pictured by thin cords going down, and so forth. So are you with me still? He's saying that in the spiritual world, not here, in the spiritual world, articles of clothing, hats, wigs, capes, all this good stuff that we wear around, that stuff is an indicator of what other communities you're connected to. Swedenborg was big on spiritual communities, connect with each other, they influence how each other thinks. These spiritual connections are what make us us. So you can tell by what somebody has on, what communities they're connected to, and if that article of clothing is taken off, then the connection is severed, or vice versa. The connection is severed, the article of clothing is gone. And this can be used by conniving spirits to manipulate other people, as we see here, Spiritual Experiences 4827. Certain Englishmen, Maul, he'll sometimes refer to people by name, his contemporaries by name, had cheated his associates, and this is a guy he knew who had passed on to the other world, had cheated his associates in the world and defrauded them of their property. These fraudulent practices were turned into magic. 1. He was able to take off one cap and put on others, many and different kinds of them, and depending on their placement, produce perceptions of and belief in different things on the part of those on whom the caps were put. For a cap symbolizes such things. So this is a guy who could take different hats and put them on people somehow, and that would change the way those people thought. Now, this would be what Swedenborg would call an abuse of correspondences. And he says that all the dark arts, or a lot of evil power, a lot of evil manipulation by evil spirits of people occurs through abusing correspondences, abusing the way the divine design works. And you see that here, that's how all evil operates. If you get somebody, they're going to do a phone scam or something. They're going to call up people who are 65 plus and say, "Hi, we're the Firefighters Association. We want a donation. Send it here." And when people send it, it turns out it was a scam. That's manipulating people's trust. That hey, taking people's goodwill and funneling it to you. And then you just see, like, we have this whole system which makes it easy to pay for anything with a credit card, but some people use that to steal the number from it and act like they're someone they're not. So there's this manipulation of the system, and in the spiritual world there are these different systems, and so people that want to get ahead by nefarious means figure out how to game those systems, and so there's constantly an effort on the part of the good to stop that and protect people. So that's a little bit of how that game is played with a cap guy. All right, so enough with me talking for a little while. This is going to be more Swedenborg, but Jonathan Rose, the translator, is going to be reading it. This is a little excerpt from Swedenborg where he describes an encounter he had where he saw some people about to have what he would call wisdom games or a discussion. And that's going to be a setup because at the end of that discussion, there's something clothing related. So here's a little clip of one of Swedenborg's experiences.
Once I had a conversation with two angels, one of whom came from a heaven in the east and the other from a heaven in the south. When these angels realized that I was meditating on secrets of wisdom having to do with love, they said, "Are you not aware of the wisdom games that take place in our world?" "Not yet," I said. "There are lots of them," they said. They explained that spirits who love truth in a spiritual way gather together on receiving a sign. These spirits then debate issues that require deep understanding, and they draw conclusions. The angels took me by the hand, saying to me, "Come with us, and you will see and hear." We received the sign that a gathering is happening today. They led me across a large flat area of land to a hill. I was surprised to see here a covered walkway or colonnade formed entirely of living palm trees. It began at the bottom of the hill and continued to the top. We went into it and made our way up the hill. At the hill's highest point, a stand of trees came into view. Within this stand of trees, earth had been built up in such a way as to form an arena. In the arena, there was a level area paved with pebbles of different colors. Around the paved part on all four sides, there were chairs set up on which the lovers of wisdom were sitting. At the center of the whole arena, there was a table. On it lay a document sealed with a signet ring.
All right, so we're about to have a great conversation in the spiritual world, but we're not going to go over what it is today. Sorry, because we're talking about clothes, right? You can download True Christianity for free, read that. It's number 47, I believe. We're just going to look at the end of it, number 48, because here we have what happens when people talk about something and this is the rewards that they get for it. Immediately, someone came into view, flying down from above. So this is after the conversation has taken place, and this is the end of it, right? Did I already say that? Okay. He had 2 wings attached to his ankles and 2 more attached to his temples. So already you got some kind of clothing stuff. He was carrying prizes, robes, hats, and laurel wreaths. He landed on the ground, then gave opalescent robes to the people sitting on the north side. To the people sitting on the west side, he gave scarlet robes. To the people sitting on the south side, he gave hats whose rims were decorated with bands of gold and bands of pearls, and whose raised left sides were decorated with the diamonds cut in the shape of flowers. To the people sitting on the east side, however, he gave laurel wreaths with rubies and sapphires in them. Decorated with these prizes from their wisdom games, they all went joyfully home. So all those details mean something. It's not just that there was flowers because they look nice or sapphires. That this all has some kind of meaning. And this was people seated on different sides had been those of different opinions in this conversation. So everybody gets rewarded according to the opinion that they had, and their reward is somehow a reflection of the kind of people they are. Those in the East were the ones closest to the truth, or with the clearest connection to it. And they had these wreaths. And this is not, Swedenborg never quite said this, but if you look at it, often people who are high up in the heavenly mindset, the headgear they wear is like a wreath. It's open on top, and is that a correspondence with God being allowed to come through into the mind. You read about people in hell having like big pointy sort of hats, so I don't know, but that's the kind of thing we're looking for. All right. So with that in mind, with all of this in mind, everything in the spiritual wardrobe, we're going to do a little correspondences meditation of our own. So what's going to happen is we're going to play a clip with a few different images of clothing and just be looking at it and just think about what kind of stuff could this symbolize? What kind of correspondence could it have? So just be a minute. So relax and let's check it out. So hopefully you had some good imagination or good insight on that, what it could all mean. If you did, share it with your friends and your family, and they'll say, what are you talking about? All right, cool. Let's go to our next section. We're going to take a look at the good book. So if you were watching last week's episode, that was entirely about the Bible story of Adam and Eve, because as out there as Swedenborg seems, he also happened to be very into the Bible, which is a paradox for a lot of people. And in the Bible, this language of correspondences, we're talking about how clothes mean different things. In the text of those stories, that the clothing has that same meaning as well. So we want to take a look here at just a few examples from that, because Swedenborg does spend time on it, and it's fascinating stuff. We're going to start with True Christianity 229, where he says, in the literal meaning, and this is about that whole text, and if you have, depending on your relationship with that text, this will be interesting in different ways. In the literal meaning, the word, by which he means the Bible, is like a clothed person whose face, forearms, and hands are exposed. All the teachings that relate to our faith and life, and therefore our salvation, are exposed there. The other teachings are clothed. Even then, in many passages where the teachings are clothed, they are still visible, as a woman with a thin piece of silk over her face can still see objects in front of her. In fact, as the truths in the Word are multiplied and organized by our love for them, they shine out and become more and more clearly evident. So you might be saying, what is he talking about? Well, again, we'll be rescued by a diagram. This, he's talking about, so picturing the Word as a person. A person is mostly clothed, but you can see that the face and the hands are exposed. And Swedenborg is saying this is the parts of the Bible that seem accessible. Love your neighbor as yourself. You shall not steal. Things that, this is good and it makes sense and you can live with this. However, if you look on the left side, the clothing, there's all the genealogies, the stories about different wars, the strange imagery. How is that all helpful? How is that even good? Swedenborg is saying that's the hidden stuff. Some places more deeply hidden, some places more transparently hidden. So let's just look at a couple examples here. We have one of the more famous stories in the Bible, the burning bush. Moses comes up to the burning bush, and he looked down there. What's he doing? He's taken off his shoes, and he was doing that because he was commanded to take off his shoes, because here he had holy ground. So Swedenborg comments on the meaning of that in Secrets of Heaven 6844. Anyone can see that the shoes here represent something out of harmony with divine holiness, so that slipping them off was an act representing the setting aside of discordant elements. Otherwise, what could it matter to the deity whether a person approached in shoes or bare feet, as long as that person was inwardly capable of approaching the deity in faith and love? Shoes, then, symbolize sensory information. And sensory information, it's the shallowest facet of the earthly plane, is such that it cannot coexist with reverent contemplation of the deity. Therefore, since it was important to honor representative meaning at that time, Moses was not allowed to come near wearing shoes. So he's saying that, hey, the shoes are representative, and particularly back then with the way religion was, the representations were important. So shoes are the most external part of you, which is also the lowest part of you according to Swedenborg's sort of spiritual physics that we've discussed in other episodes. So it makes sense that the stuff that's covering the bottom of the feet, that in terms of our psyche or our spirit, it's the most external, superficial things. And this is why when we enter into some kind of sphere of worship, don't we often turn off your cell phones, we're going to sit for a while with candles, we kind of sort of put the most superficial elements aside, right? And that is what is symbolized by the taking off of the shoes, right? So another example, the woman clothed with the sun. If you guys heard this in the book of Revelation, it says that there was a woman and she was clothed with the sun. And Swedenborg says that the sun is a symbol for the emanation of God's love, and that the woman is a symbolization for what Swedenborg called a new church, which again in Swedenborgianese means a new way of living, looking at the world that is to come to the human race, a more enlightened period. And being clothed in the sun means being surrounded by this love for the whole human race, or love to the Lord, which Swedenborg says is the same thing, because if you love the Lord, you want to do what the Lord wants, which is to help everybody, right? So her being clothed in the sun means that, right? So that's how the biblical clothing happens. And every single piece of clothing in the Bible has similar symbolism, but that's not surprising, since, as we were just saying, all the clothing in the spiritual world has that same sort of symbolism. All right? Cool. All right, let's take it to the next segment. Let's get into we're talking about clothing, let's zoom in a little closer and talk about the actual stuff that clothing is made out of. All right, so we're going to talk about the building blocks of clothing, specifically fabric, and what does it mean that clothing is made up of smaller elements. Heaven and Hell 178. The garments with which angels are clothed, like all other things with them, correspond. And because they correspond, they have real existence. Their garments correspond to their intelligence, and therefore all in the heavens appear clothed in accord with their intelligence. So we've said similar things before, but I just want to reiterate that what you have is on spiritually, what you're wearing spiritually is a representation of your mind, of your worldview, of how you think about life. So, with that in mind, here's the other side to this piece. Secrets of Heaven 9915. A weaver. So this is talking about symbolism of a weaver. Okay, we're just dropping into the middle of something. A weaver means the power of will. Will being like our will to do things. The reason why a weaver has this meaning is that the will flows into the understanding and weaves it. So these two parts in us, to such an extent that the contents of the understanding are weavings produced by the will. For what the will desires, it fashions in such a way that it may appear to the sight in the understanding. This sight is thought, which is why a designer means the power of understanding. Okay, so what this is saying overall, a little Swedenborg 101, there are two parts in us. And this is something almost everyone acknowledges. There are feelings and thoughts. Like in our mental life, you get emotions and you get thoughts, words and feelings. And that's the will and the understanding, or the volition and the discernment. And our will, what we love, what we care about, takes all the things we know and weaves them into a certain arrangement. Can't you get two people who have the same threads, they know the same facts, but because of what they care about, they come out with totally different interpretations on the world. And those interpretations are the clothing that you're wearing spiritually, all right? And to take the correspondence a little bit further, think about the different kinds of fabric and the tags on clothes. They have all these symbols. This kind of fabric you can wash, but only at this temperature. Don't iron this one, whatever that square circle thing is. Don't put this one in a pyramid. I don't know what they all mean, but they all mean something. right? And so that is the idea that we all have these different minds, and different minds are predisposed or do well with certain kinds of processing or certain kinds of living, right? Isn't that just like if washing is some kind of symbol of changing for the better, the same path doesn't work for everyone. We all have different settings, or else we'll get shrunk, or whatever that means spiritually. All right, you get it? So fabric, this is the picture of the fabric of our being, or the fabric of our mind. What we love weaves together the facts and creates us, which is the shirt, right? Is that cool? Okay, I hope so. Let's think on it. Let's meditate on it a little bit. We'll do one more correspondences. This will just be a couple of shots of fabric, of how it's put together and the different kinds, and be thinking about the different kinds of minds and how this might represent different things in us or different kinds of people. So vibe out for a second. Here you go. All right, so hopefully that got the wheels turning, and just take these kinds of concepts, load them up in your mind, and maybe later on this week, sometime later, you get your own insights about them. All right, so we've looked at a lot of different kinds of clothes and what they symbolize, but there's one outfit we haven't looked at, and that's the subject of our section number 5. So, two silly things about that. One, I said it's number 5. It was actually number 6. Tricked myself. And then also, do you guys know what the birthday suit is? That means naked. No clothes. Because there is also an element of nakedness in the afterlife, as there is here. However, it's a little bit different than we experience it here. And we're going to get into that now, because we have to go there. Don't turn it off now. Don't worry. There's not going to be any visuals with this. Okay. Secrets of Heaven, 9477 begins it. A loving kindness is a heavenly quality, and religious truth is a covering for that kindness, because truth sheathes goodness. You notice anything you talk about with Swedenborg, he's always talking about goodness and truth, or love and wisdom, or this major duality. He's always talking about that. Here we go. As a consequence, truth is symbolized in the word by clothes. The heavenly qualities of love with its goodness are represented in heaven as naked. So naked is how people from the Lord's heavenly kingdom are seen. And the heavenly kingdom is the highest, most closely connected area. But people from the Lord's spiritual kingdom, people whom the Lord has introduced to neighborly love and its goodness by means of faith with its truth, are seen wearing clothes. The spiritual kingdom is lower down than the heavenly kingdom, and anything that is lower is a covering for what is higher. Lower entities are more exterior, higher entities more interior. So at the highest level, when we've become the most connected to God and to this love, you don't need the clothes anymore. It doesn't happen. But when you need sort of external teachings to get you to love, those are symbolized by the clothes. So there we have the clothes. And here's a little diagram about spiritual and heavenly, those two levels he describes. As I was saying, in spiritual, the truth brings you to love. You learn what you're supposed to do, you kind of compel yourself, you move yourself there, and then you become loving. In the heavenly mindset, you're at the love already, and from that, you desire to know the truth to help other people. You see the difference? He talks about it a lot. We're just touching on it there, but that's the basics of what we're talking about here. And then, so he's going to talk now that there's other reasons for the clothing and non-clothing, and it has to do with innocence, and it has to do with what you would call lack of lasciviousness or chastity. So let's get into that here. Spiritual Experiences 4719. Marriage love is with the spiritual angels begins from outward things. It is otherwise with the heavenly angels. With them, marriage love begins from inward things, thus from a joining of souls. They don't care about nudity, just as is the case in the tropical zones, where they see each other naked but still do not love any other than their own married partner. Swedenborg is talking about people in this world that they'd probably heard about, because I don't think he'd been to the tropics, but people who live without clothes but still are faithful to each other. The heavenly and the other life as well appear naked, and the spiritual clothed. The latter, the spiritual, are lascivious from their nature in the world, but the former are not. I have been shown by them that this is the case. And besides this, there is the reason that with the heavenly, the will is not as corrupt as it is with the spiritual. They love from this will, which is the innermost part of a person. The spiritual, however, love from their intellectual part, which is comparatively outward. Consequently, in the beginning, it is lascivious. From this, it is also clear that the state of the heavenly is the reverse of that of the spiritual. Plus, it's cool to read that because we get to use the word lascivious, which is not, I think, used enough these days. It's a pretty sweet word. What he's basically saying is, well, why aren't we all just naked right now? Because we would all freak out, right? We don't have that kind of mindset. It would be very hard to have functional relationships of any kind. And he's saying that in the heavenly mindset, you can. You can be around naked people and you're not thinking about, oh man, I like this person, I don't like this person. There you can still have this fidelity, and it's not a cause for concern. But in the lower heavens, you still need that clothing. And so he goes on a little farther with that. Secrets of Heaven 8375. Again, he's talking about these people who are in the world in the warm zones that he'd heard about. Inhabitants who live in the warm zones go naked except for a loincloth. They are not ashamed of their nudity because they have chaste minds, love only their spouses, and abhor adultery. They were shocked to find that when spirits from our planet saw the way they walked in their nakedness, they laughed at them and had obscene thoughts. Our spirits paid no attention whatever to the heavenly way they live, only to details like these. Their spirits said it was a sign that our spirits, sorry for all these pronouns, it's confusing in the Journal of Spiritual Experiences, but you'll get the point. These spirits said that it was a sign that our spirits are more interested in bodily and worldly than heavenly matters, and that smut monopolizes their thinking. I told them that nakedness is not shameful or scandalous to people who live chastely in a state of innocence. So essentially, it's saying there that when people are naked, some people can only pay attention to that. They don't care about how those people are living or what they're like or what they're doing. They're just like, you're naked. So because of that, not everybody can live like that. But if you get all the way to the top, we can live as nature intended. That's what he's saying. All right. So quickly, before we finish this out, let's talk about application. So we're learning about these spiritual clothes. What does that mean for us? I think the metaphor in itself has potential application. If you think about if clothing is really a symbol for how you're thinking, we can change clothing. I mean, you can work to find different outfits. You can change styles. There's that same kind of ability. You're not locked into a piece of clothing. So can we work to keep our mindsets in a place where we can improve them? You think about clothing going out of date. Isn't it interesting? If you think about whenever you were in the grip of, current trends, whatever age you were, when it was like, whoa, what is considered cool now looks so cool. Look at clothing from like 20 years before that, or 10 years before that. You're like, this is so dumb. But in the moment, something wraps people up and they say, this is cool. And is it that same way with certain ways of looking at the world that go out of date, but at the time really hook the mindset? And thinking about the appropriate clothing for situations. That here we go and we decide, I'm going to a funeral, I'm going to a wedding, I better wear the appropriate clothes. Can we get our minds in that same, okay, if I'm going into this particular situation, how do I get my mind right? Make sure I put on the right spiritual tie, So what clothes are we wearing? We're going to be reflecting on this. What are we wearing? Because the only point to learning any of this stuff is that it helps us move closer to heaven so that from that heavenly mindset, we can help other people. So if anything here helps you with that, we did our job. If not, we tried really hard. All right, let's take your questions on the other side of this video break. Thanks for hanging out. We made it here. Let's take a look at a few questions and see if any of this made any sense to you or if you have good ideas about where to go next. Our first one. This is from Deborah, YouTube. What does off the left eye mean? Oh, that's a good one. That's a great one. So if any of you are watching this channel, you might have noticed that it's called Off the Left Eye. What does that mean? And that's really something that I feel like we should have a video about, right? If we have that name for the channel. We just never got around to making one. So I just explain it to people. Here it is. Are you ready? Off the left eye is, and this is going to be shocking to a lot of people, a reference to Swedenborg. It's an experience that he recounts in two places, one of them in the book Heaven and Hell, when he is being shown what it's like to cross from this world into the next world, like what it's like when we die. And he has this whole experience he's describing, and at one point when he's awakening in the spirit, he says it seems as though a covering is pulled off of his left eye, and that's when he gets the use of spiritual sight. So the idea is, that the right side has to do with love and action, and the left side with thought and knowing, and that what we're trying to do on this channel is dispense information that hopefully, as I was just saying, everybody takes out into the world and does something with. So we're doing the left eye side of things, and the rest of us do the right side of things, right? So that's what off the left eye means. Thanks for the question. Let's take a look at another one. This is Florian on YouTube. I have a Christian friend who is skeptical of Swedenborg because he finds it non-biblical. Having seen last week's episode on Adam and Eve, any tips on how I can keep the dialogue open regarding Swedenborg? It's interesting because you get, when we do a show that's very biblical, we get some people saying that's too biblical, and then we get other people saying he's not biblical enough. So what I would say is this: I don't think you would find anybody that's more biblical than Swedenborg. And what I mean is, you look at the amount of material he wrote and how often he quotes that book. There's a couple works, Divine Love and Wisdom, where he quotes the Bible very sparingly, but everywhere else it's all over. So it's not like he ignores it or doesn't go with it. So that's one thing you could point out to your friend, that he knew the Bible better and had it in his theology better than a lot of the Christian thinkers. And actually, a lot of the current doctrine that's out there is not necessarily as Bible related as what Swedenborg says. And that his whole series, Secrets of Heaven, is nothing but explaining the meaning of the Bible. Just the amount of time and devotion that he gave to it shows he takes it seriously, that he said everything you'd want to have someone who wants to be called biblical. So he says that this is a hugely important book. This is not only the Word of God, but through it, this is the technology through which we can access the mind of God. Meaning we can open that connection, that there are all these truths in there. He goes on and on about it. I don't know exactly what tips to give you because I don't know what your friend is looking for, but there is a lot of ammo in there for anybody who wants to see the connection. I would say actually if you're looking for that, look for the book True Christianity, which you can download for free on Swedenborg.com. That has a lot of good connection if you're coming from a sort of Christian side of things. So those are my thoughts. It's a great question. Hopefully your friend will give it a chance, because I think you'll find Swedenborg is cool. Even if your friend doesn't love everything he says, it's an interesting ride anyway. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. This is Barb. Is there a correspondences dictionary, like Correspondences for Dummies? If there is, I would love to read it. I still struggle with that. The closest thing, as Stuart just pointed out, is maybe there's Potts Concordance. There's something called Potts Concordance, which is this book by somebody Potts, who I believe wrote this book where he lines up all the different correspondences. Karin might know, who's in the chat room right now. If you do, Karin, write it out and you can answer that question there. But I think that's the closest thing. I still struggle a lot with the concept of correspondences. What exactly does it mean? But it would be cool to just kind of get like click here for this, click there for that. And I also like to, what about the correspondences of things Swedenborg doesn't describe? We once had an ecologist on the show talking about diatoms, which are this microscopic form of life that wasn't discovered in Swedenborg's day, but she was thinking about what Swedenborg would have said about the correspondences because of how it functions. I think that stuff is cool too. So, Potts Concordance, and then hopefully we'll come out with something like that soon. So, great question. Okay, next we have the One Minds on YouTube in relation to inner spirit. Sure, I can talk about it and I'll try to make the talking make sense. So here, there's not necessarily a correlation. I mean, you've seen that movie Shallow Hal? Maybe you haven't, with Jack Black in it, where there's supposedly this guy who gets affected in this certain way. I forget how it happens, where he can now see inner beauty the same way we see outer beauty. It doesn't usually work like that. I mean, how you look physically, the shape of your features and everything, doesn't really have to do with what you're like inside. That's a physical thing. It obviously can be externally here, it's kind of set. However, Swedenborg talks about, as we were hearing today, that the inner depths shine out from the face there. He goes on and on to talk about the kind of love we have, the kind of person we are. That's what shapes our features, our bodies, everything there. And so the more deeply we are into love, goodness, everything that is noble and true, the more beautiful we are. Here, beauty isn't really an indicator of anything, because you can have very attractive people that are horrible people, and you can have people that their moms think they look really nice, but the rest of us would pass on them, but they can just be the most amazing people. There's no indicator on that, right? But in the spiritual world, it actually is somebody looks beautiful because they are. So that's what I want to say about outer beauty. And there's always deeper depths that aren't showing. That even Swedenborg was saying, that even your spiritual body and clothes are related to the outer parts of your mind, and the inner parts shine through the face, but even the most inward parts you still can't see. So it's not like everything is out there in the front, but it's formed based on that. So there's a few words in a row that I said, and hopefully that touches on what you're looking for. Let's look at our next question. Jim, YouTube. If I make it to a higher heaven, can I wear a friar's tunic? Symbolizes how I lead my life and how I already have one I wear to the Renaissance Festival. Man, I am gonna say yes, you can, and I'm gonna write a note. I could see that there would be sort of a side of things where it's like, I really like to wear these particular clothes. Am I gonna get to? I don't think it's like strict and hierarchical. Like you were supposed to wear your white robe and you didn't today, so you're gonna go into the stockade Renaissance stuff, right? Is that it with this thing where you hang? Okay. I'm sure that if you're into something, it can be worn. And then in the spiritual world, whatever inside you is making you enjoy that set of clothing, that's something in you, and that will be manifest on that side too. And I can't imagine that it wouldn't be that you'd get to wear that, especially if it has a particular meaning to you. So those are a couple things that I want to say about it. Appreciate it very much, Jim. Okay, next, David, YouTube. Does our love for I guess they're all from YouTube. I don't know why I say YouTube. We used to get some from Facebook, but now there's so many on YouTube we can't get to anything else. Does our love for the things define part of our identity? Yeah, it does. What we love is our life, as Swedenborg says, and what we are doing in this world is choosing what we love. There are little things like you might love go-kart racing, but that's not the core of your being. At the essential level, it's a love for either helping or harming, or a love for serving, or a love for controlling. Those are the two polar. You kind of have a deepest soul level love. Everything else is kind of a branch out of that. However, so I don't know. I don't know how much it works in terms of, here, if I get really into model trains, will that stay with me as I go to heaven? Swedenborg was talking about those spirits that were with him that were obsessed with particular things, like that particular outfit or whatever. He said, remember back in the beginning, he said that they had acquired that from their life in the world. However, he said those were bodily, like sort of people who are in a lower mindset. I don't know, as you go up, if you retain that stuff or if it changes into a correspondence or you find new things. I don't know. But the thing that has the biggest impact on our identity, according to Swedenborg, is whether we love other people or whether we love control or gratification above all things. So it's the love of good or evil is what most defines the identity. All right. So, and we all love that in our own way. So we are our own person, or we're our own shade of that. affection. Okay? All right. So I feel like I'm getting on too many tangents. All right, let's take a look at our next one. This is from Ginger. I'm wondering, since I spent my life taking care of the sick, I'm wishing for a gardening job in heaven. Can I put in a request for that? Yeah, like how does it, is it full, or like, okay, we're going to open up a new garden? Yeah. So central to life is in heaven, as Swedenborg describes it, is the joy of serving the greater good. But your job, what you do. So you're not going to have some kind of job you don't love. All of us are particularly suited for some perfect thing. And God is interested in our being as happy as we can possibly be, right? He's not interested in putting us somewhere where we don't want to be, where we're waiting for the weekend. So if you have this, whatever is the deepest, most great thing is what God's going to put you to. And everything there is not like gardening has to do with the mind and, the things of intelligence and wisdom and putting the mind in order. So there maybe even like spiritual gardening has those elements to it. You know what I mean? Like it's something deeper and bigger, but better. So what I'm saying is everybody's got a dream job. You've got your dream job there. And whatever is deep in your spirit, that's what's going to come out there. So for you, I hope it's that gardening job, and I hope it's the coolest job that it could ever be. All right? Thanks, Ginger. Let's take a look at another one. Christine, I'm a book editor. I love it. Would there be books in heaven? Yeah, Swedenborg describes books in heaven. I believe I'm correct on this. He actually described seeing his books that he was writing in heaven before he wrote them. Or I have to go look at that. I know he saw them there. I believe, that before he even put them down, that they were already there, and that he was just sort of copying them down here. So there are books in heaven, and I'm sure they need good editing, because we don't want to be in heaven reading stuff that doesn't make sense. All right, so that's what I would say. Who am I, though? All right, thanks, Christine. Let's take a look at another one. Lee, why do we need clothes in heaven if there's no judgment of appearance? Is it not all just a state of mind? I think that there's, it's a good question. There's different levels, like Swedenborg was talking about. Once you get high enough up where you really are cleaned out, there's no clothes. But even into the first and second levels of heaven, we bring a lot of our negativity still with us. So the clothing still serves a purpose there. You probably, just like here, you're not in clothes all the time, but in general, there's sort of that. So it has to do with state of mind. And if we get high enough up, then forget it. We'll focus on other things. Okay, so that's what I have to say about that. Let's take a look at another one. This is Mike Blackbird. So we can eat fruits and berries, but don't need it food to survive, right? Does that sound about right? I love strawberries. I want to be in strawberry fields and patches. Yes, that actually is right. It is a curious phenomenon, as Swedenborg describes it, that, because you remember even before it was talking about in hell, they don't get given food if they don't work. You don't die without food. In heaven, the spirit doesn't need food to survive, but it does seem like people can eat anyway for pleasure. So I believe you've hit it right on there. The actual sustenance of the soul is being of useful service and interacting with what you love, but there is food there as well. So I would imagine there's really, really happening strawberry patches that you can hang out in there. That's my guess on the whole thing. All right, another one. This is from Deborah, YouTube. I've been such an awful person most of my life. Though my heart remained in love and needing love, I was still conniving, a cheat, and much more. How can I make it right now? Is it too late? Will I be molded in heaven based on my past? I hope I'm forgiven, but I need to know. So I appreciate you being willing to share that, because that's a lot of personal stuff and pretty intense, like inventory of yourself and looking at, okay, I've caused some harm and I don't want to be doing that. So I appreciate you being willing to share that with us. From what I understand of Swedenborg, it's not history that matters, it's where you're headed right now. Obviously, we can't go back in the past and change what we've done, but we can disown it, meaning it's what you're saying there is, I was bad, I shouldn't have done that. That means that you're not still, I was right. I should have done all that stuff. That's part of it. And then you're looking to, it's like in the 12-step program. It says, made amends wherever possible, and then stop doing the behavior. That's all we can do. You cannot be alive in this world and not have a hope. Anybody who's working, putting in the work, can get there. So it's not like it's a scoreboard that if you get down 40 points, you can't make it back up. If you want to put in, if you want to be good, yeah, you're already there. That's the step that all of us, we all got problems. But if we see, oh, that's not good. People shouldn't live like that. People shouldn't treat each other like that. I want to make a change. That's great. Man, you ever seen the Christmas Carol, some movie of that, or read the book or something? Scrooge, he had this whole bad life, but he figured out, I want to be different. And then he goes off a good. It's not like deathbed repentance where you say, okay, I'm sorry for everything I ever did, but it's real. I'm sorry for what I did. I want to go forward. I think what you're in a great spot, and I appreciate seeing your example. And I think we all go through that in little ways. Really, it's not about who's done what. It's about that we all agree these are the good things. Let's all pursue these, and let's all not harm each other. So I think you're in a good spot. Again, I'm just me, but that's what I think. All right, 2 more questions we're going to get to here, and then we'll wrap it up. Katrina B., does Swedenborg say anything about existing before our birth on Earth? No, man. He doesn't. And I don't mean that he says we don't exist before. He just doesn't talk about that. And he wrote a lot, but he doesn't mention that, which I find interesting. But that's really all I got, man. He doesn't talk about when does life start, that kind of stuff. If he does, it's buried in there. It's not a huge point of his. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to say no, man. He doesn't. But there's got to be some truth about it somewhere, and I'm sure we'll find out someday. All right, last one. This is Maria. Is it possible that in order for people who have passed on to contact a living person in a dream, they have to enter a dream state themselves? Oh, I don't know. However, that sounds like a kind of thing that could be possible because there are mechanisms. Just like here, if I want to contact somebody on the phone, I have to be on a phone as well. And similarities in states of mind actually are a big part of communication. That Swedenborg would talk about how there'd be some angels who were so high up in their thoughts and concepts that Swedenborg couldn't communicate with them. He had to communicate with spirits, like people who were lower down but had a link to them, through an intermediary. So it could be that in order to get in touch with us, there has to be someone has to come into a similar state to ours. I don't know, but it sounds like that sounds like it would fit right in. So those are my thoughts on that. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everybody. Great questions. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. It's cool to get to dig into the nooks and crannies of the Swedenborg experience and also the life experience, because we're asking these questions about life. So that's why we call it Swedenborgian Life, I guess. All right. If you want to support the program, help it keep going strong, consider making a donation. We're a nonprofit. The Swedenborg Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3. You'll get tax deductions for it. We actually have a matching grant happening. So if you make a little donation, it'll get matched 5-1. So that will help us out a lot. Appreciate your thought. You can click this thing that was right there, or open up the link in the description. Okay, next episode, we're going to take a little walk down memory lane and dig up some of the old stuff that we've done, past conversations we've had in this show that you may have missed as we revisit some of the potent moments of the past. So I look forward to seeing you next Monday. And until then, I hope your week is great and that you're spiritually clothed in the greatest outfit you could possibly imagine. Thanks.